This is the story of the most bizarre game to ever exist, and the story of a German man with a dream and how it quickly became a nightmare over the course of 6 years. The story of how Frank Fitzner and Nuclear Vision Entertainment created Psychotoxic, one of the worst first-person shooters of all time. Released on September 3rd, 2004 in Germany, and later on March 8th, 2005 in the United States, Psychotoxic is the product of one of the most bungled development cycles in history. It lays great claim to being the craziest game ever made, however, not just because of this, but also its insane narrative and hysterically bad gameplay. If you've never heard about Psychotoxic until today, you will learn everything about the game from concept to release, as I finally get to tell this incredible story. Psychotoxic can best be described as a dinosaur, because calling it a product of its time would be an insult to corridor shooters that made legitimate advancements from their late 90s counterparts. Psychotoxic hardly has to be compared to other shooters to be exposed as garbage, however, because even if it was the last shooter on the planet, it would be the equivalent of someone pissing in your mouth when you're dying of thirst. That isn't to say that Psychotoxic doesn't attempt anything beyond the standard fare. It just fails miserably whenever it does. Featuring 29 levels and a conspicuously top-heavy protagonist by the name of Angela Prophet, the goal is to make it from point A to point B while fighting plot-specific enemies. Unfortunately, this is only where the bulk of the problems begin, because while Psychotoxic is certainly awful, the integration and execution of various mechanics, alongside its genuinely baffling level design and lobotomized artificial intelligence, make a bad game an all-time worst. The first level, which takes place in an FBI headquarters, is the player's first exposure to a potpourri of half-baked gunplay mechanics, narrow corridors, and acrobatic AI. You're given this revolver as your starting weapon, which has the fire rate of a rat dropping turds after eating sunflower seeds. The enemies have silenced pistols and are deadly accurate, which forces you to use the lean mechanic. I've always been a big advocate for lean in games, but just like any other mechanic, it can be ruined by the slightest tweak. In this case, you cannot fire your weapon while leaning. It's used entirely as an information gathering tool, so you can presumably get the drop on enemies by pre-firing them. With that said, they'll always know where you are, so any sort of stealth is totally thrown out of the window. You'll note the heavy use of silenced pistol here. You can steal weapons off enemies when they die, and you'll want to replace this piece of shit revolver as soon as you can. This isn't a revolver-specific issue, but it often doesn't shoot where you're aiming, and with the consistently inconsistent nature of one-tap headshots in this game, you're better off running the pistol, as it can fire faster and reloads only moderately slower. This level features the tightest hallways in the game, which has its own set of problems, namely creating engaging fights when the only thing you can do is shoot the enemy in front of you. But what becomes incredibly annoying are the inordinate number of physics objects. It's entirely possible to get stuck on them while trying to reach an objective to the point where you're forced to reload your last save. What doesn't help with all of this is that the field of view is just appalling, making you feel closer to every object and the environment feel that much smaller. More on the physics objects and field of view later. The AI peaks in this level, and that's not an exaggeration or a joke. The behavior you see demonstrated in this first level from the AI is their behavior for the entire game. It ranges from absolutely brain dead to potentially brain dead. The only challenge in the game comes from not getting bullshitted when they become omniscient. Now I know that Angie's chest probably enters the room before her, but that's no excuse for the AI to know your exact position at all times and to stand there waiting for you. The second they see you, they begin firing at you with incredible accuracy, quickly taking chunks off your health until you're dead, at which point Angie grabs her stomach and falls to the floor like she ate some bad bratwurst. I spent most of this game on 1 HP because even the leaning and pre-firing method doesn't always work, as the AI is far too unpredictable at times when you've aggroed them or you're loading into an old save. Their animation is horrible too. They do cartwheels to avoid gunfire, a method not likely to be recommended by your local law enforcement anytime soon. Unfortunately, there aren't many more jokes I can make about the first level, because when you're transitioned out of the small corridors, this game attempts open area and long distance combat, and that's when it truly becomes as horrid as it possibly can be, given its supplemental gameplay mechanics and schizophrenic level design. Psychotoxic is a game well aware of the potential monotony in corridor shooters, which is why it often tries to break things up and offer new mechanics to the player. In the first level, you're introduced to the angelic powers that can be used against the enemies. There's invisibility, slow motion, self-healing, and a shield. All of these work on a meter that is gained by finding and acquiring the powers, and in concept, the player has to make the choice of when to use the powers in certain fights and when to preserve them. The problem is, they really make no difference. While the self-heal is longed for at times because of the cheating nature of the enemies, it's for this exact reason that it's pointless. You regenerate your health only to have it taken back down at the beginning of an engagement, at which point you either voluntarily reset your save, or you're inevitably killed and forced to, but this time you already know where the enemy is, and they're not going to hit you anyways. The invisibility is almost certainly broken, as enemies can detect you depending on how close you are to them, but there's virtually no consistency to this, and it's unclear as to whether or not they can hear you. The shield is the same deal, and you're not given much feedback as to what is actually happening when you activate it. Since you don't see enemy gunfire, it feels as though nothing is really happening, you just don't see your health go down at all. I'm almost sure that this one is broken too, given its inconsistency across multiple enemies. Now, the slow motion is my personal favorite. Not for any good reason, but just because of how awful it is. Brace yourselves. All of these powers are given to you in an effort to create dynamic and varying encounters with the enemies, but this game's level design essentially nullifies all this. It's cemented in the first level that when you're not in a corridor, you're in an open area, with the enemies strategically placed in a trial and error array, where you'll take down the guys you immediately see and die to the ones you couldn't. Meaning that even with the powers, it's nigh impossible to have a smooth run of a sequence without death. Your second run is then spent figuring out how you died and overcoming that obstacle, thus creating a pattern as to how you approach an engagement as opposed to treating it dynamically. For example, every time you enter here, you're meant to explode the car to deal with the two guys ahead, then you dispatch the two guys above you, and then you deal with the guy here and the guy to the left. In this section, the game gives you slow motion, but because of how the enemies are placed, and a myriad of other technical issues which we will address at length later, you are more than likely just going to die like this. Later in the game, Psychotoxic tends to fall back on this tired formula when it is clearly out of ideas or trying to pad out its length, but they're spliced in between fresh content, which is something I can't really take away from the game. This is more of a con than a pro, however, because when it does assemble unique combat arenas, they're all incredibly flawed for different reasons, as can be seen in the second level. I said that Psychotoxic is a game aware of the pitfalls of conventional corridor shooters, but it's more accurate to say that it's terrified of them. It is a game so afraid of being stale, boring, and repetitive that it introduces elements from other genres at times, in an attempt to make all of its levels feel special or notable. In the game, you're able to go into the dreams of other people, and in the second level, you're in the dreams and thoughts of a security guard. Don't worry, because even the game itself questions why a security guard would dream of any of this. What should worry us is that this level has platforming. I haven't talked about how astoundingly bad the movement in this game is, so let's have a go at it. Angie moves like she's nothing but a torso magnetized to the floor. Jumping is atrocious and only lifts you about 1 inch off the floor. The entire game's collision system with objects is screwed, so on top of moving like you've got a pole up your ass and your legs have been amputated, you will also constantly be bumping into invisible, rigid corridors you cannot navigate around. The biggest problem, though, is the fact that the world never feels to scale with the player. Everything feels too small and compact to move around, like the world is at a 1 times smaller scale than the view model. This is annoying yet manageable when you're just running and gunning in hallways, but frustrating when you're in a position to have to do precise jumps. Add the fact that Psychotoxic was not the most bug-free release, and the platforming segments usually end in you quick loading your last save after getting stuck in midair. The fun doesn't end here, though. All of these dream levels are made up of segments. In the same level, you traverse a structure where you gain new weapons and fight off ghosts and other demons. I said that the AI peaked in the first level, and that is absolutely true for the human AI. But the addition of other enemies adds no variety to the mix. The ghosts you fight generally charge at you, but can also disappear and go through objects as they are ethereal, which begs the question of how they can be shot to begin with. These enemies with knives also just charge at you, and that's about it. If all of what I've mentioned so far about this level isn't bad enough, this is also the level that makes you realize that this game has falling damage from 1 foot in the air. Realistically, one could spend a lot of time talking about how every level is bad in its own ways, but I think we should cover the greatest hits of this game, of which there are many. The next batch of levels are nothing remarkable. In the third level, I discovered an anomaly with the AI where they will shoot each other if shot by one another. I'm 50-50 on whether or not this is a bug, because I never saw it happen again, and I believe the AI may legitimately be as simplistic as shooting whatever shoots at it. In the 4th level, I shot a guy, and he just stayed there and didn't look dead, although he was. You'll actually see a lot of this in this game, and I think it has something to do with the ragdoll physics not working correctly when triggered by death. Now, the 6th level is the absolute shits. It takes place on an airplane, so the camera is tilting to the sides the entire time, which already makes no sense and makes the movement worse because of how disorienting the effect becomes. Due to the inherent design of an airplane, it makes the combat either incredibly long-ranged or very compact, both of which this game fails at. This isn't really what makes the level almost unplayable, though. Throughout the level, you collect key cards, so you can get into a room where you activate an escape pod you need to get into. The second you activate the escape pod, a timer starts. You need to get to the pod before time expires. Except, the game doesn't tell you there's a timer, nor does it show one. If you enter the objectives submenu, it tells you that you only have 5 minutes to get to the pod. But this is not even true. It took me nearly 7 minutes to die after I activated the escape pod. And no, I wasn't getting shot by enemies. I was definitely being killed because of the timer. Here's the kicker. Because I was unaware of the timer, I kept quick saving, as it's something you need to do constantly in order to make it through most of these levels because of the nature of the game. And my last quick save happened right before the timer went out, trapping me in an infinite death loop where I was forced to redo the entire level. I didn't have the time for this, and quite frankly, there hasn't been enough money printed to get me to replay one of these levels, so I turned to this game's console. That's when I learned that the game doesn't stop when you bring up the console. It was virtually impossible to input the command that would take me to the next level and execute it fast enough. So you could type in the command to end the level, but the timer would run out, and thus the next level would never load because it couldn't load before the level ending took precedence over the level loading. As it turns out, Psychotoxic not allowing me to enter its 7th level was a blessing in disguise, because once I loaded in, I quickly realized that this was not only the worst level in the game, but arguably one of the worst levels of any first-person shooter I've ever played. The level takes place in Central Park, and you're tasked with finding a scientist. We talked previously about how Psychotoxic doesn't want every level to be the same, and what differentiates this level from all the others is that it's essentially a moving, hedgeless maze. It's also important that you remember some of the more glaring problems with Psychotoxic up to this point. The movement is slow and clunky, the enemies are placed in obscure locations, the gunplay is horrid, and the AI has the IQ of Angie's cup size. Double digit. You load into the level behind enemies that are unaware that an enormous pod has crashed behind them and take them out, acquiring the MP5. This is the best weapon in the game and suits the level well because many of your engagements will be long range and the scope is a great accommodation. This is a backhanded compliment, however, because this is nearly all of the engagements. Snipe from long distance while you travel the park. Not exactly engaging, is it? As you explore, trying to find the scientist, you come across a new enemy. Behold the definitely not stereotypical thugs of New York, with such great voice lines as,
"Can you feel me? I feel you." "Hey baby, what's up? What you got on my drink, homie? Up, get it, shake, shake a little something."
While you're trying to decide whether this is awkwardly charming or shockingly racist, you'll forget that you're lost. The scientist, Lindstrom, is in the zoo, and the only means you have of getting there are these signs telling you the direction of the location and this map. You may ask why there are multiple locations given here, and that's because when you get to the zoo, you'll find a note saying that Lindstrom has relocated to the Mayorstone statue. You're actually meant to, with this awful movement, navigate the entire map with these signs, fighting enemies you literally cannot see, going from location to location, because when you finally get to the Mayorstone statue, you find a note saying that Lindstrom is at the museum. And when you get to the museum, where is Lindstrom? The zoo. This level is when I discovered that bunny hopping is a legitimate way to move around in this game and is slightly faster than the walking. Unless you want to spend 2 hours walking around this godforsaken map, it's almost required. To put this into perspective, this level is worse than an obscenely bad level where you're being chased around by Jason clones and spiders. Worse than a level where you're put into a cartoon world and the objective is to push big red buttons. And worse than a level where you're underwater and the entire world is tilted sideways and moving side to side the entire time. At least in those, you can't find spots where you can fall through the map. So, why are we doing any of this? Why are we fighting the FBI? Why are we saving scientists? Why are we entering dreams where we fight cows with Gatling guns as udders? What is the plot of this game? Well, Indecipherable is a good place to start. Psychotoxic takes place in 2022. Angela Prophet, our protagonist, is approached by the FBI at the start of the game, and when she arrives at the headquarters, she meets Dr. Harrison Infodump Saunders, who explains everything we need to know in the worst way possible.
What I'm about to tell you is going to be rather difficult for you to accept. But please, do sit down.
No thank you, I'd rather stand.
Very well. I'm quite sure that the catastrophic state of the world hasn't passed you by. There are more wars than ever before. Millions of people are starving. We even have reason to fear another world war. The state of emergency is being declared throughout the land.
I think that we're living in the same crazy world.
If something isn't done about this soon, it will be too late for us all. We need your help.
Should I serve a couple of drinks to relax the state of world politics?
There is something. Well, there's something quite extraordinary about you. I'm talking about your special powers.
How do you know about that? I've never told anyone before. I can hardly remember myself.
We've been watching over and protecting your entire life. It actually wasn't necessary, because you always looked after yourself well enough. You are the chosen one.
Stop making fun of me.
Unfortunately, this is no game.
Before Saunders dies after being randomly shot by a brainwashed agent, he tells Angie that she needs to get to New York so she can meet Dr. Lindstrom. Lindstrom knows everything about what's going on and Angie's powers. We also meet Max here, a virtual agent who is a floating pair of lips telling Angie where to go and what to do. Before Angie gets to New York, we meet our antagonist, Aaron Crowley, who delivers all of his lines like he's going through his goth phase and his parents just don't get it.
And you are?
Oh, how impolite of me. Allow me. Reverend Aaron Crowley, at your service.
What kind of a place is this?
Do you like it, my dear? This is my realm, Miss Prophet. A world outside of reality. This is my cathedral, created for the fallen, as a monument to your ignorant beliefs and your arrogant gods.
Crowley is a Satanist who believes himself to be the reincarnation of Aleister Crowley. The great plan that Max has devised to getting to New York after all other flights were cancelled is to sneak onto Air Force One, which is headed to New York, and then to get into an escape pod which he will drop in Central Park. Max also says that Saunders and Lindstrom worked together on a secret project many years ago. After you find Lindstrom in that piece of shit level, you have to use your powers to infiltrate his dreams and talk to him.
Angela Prophet? What the?
Later, Dr. Lindstrom. Why does the entire world behave as if it were mad?
We're being manipulated. The effects are different from person to person. Go to Brooklyn and speak with Brad Allen. He's the owner of the Pussy Bar. Simply say Ghost Story and he will hand them over to you. When I feel a little better, I'm gonna go and pick flowers.
What?
You actually have to go to a place called the Pussy Bar. It's a small location in-game that shows off Psychotoxic's award-winning animation. After visiting the Pussy Bar, you visit your Aunt Julie, and she basically tells Angie to piss off to go meet someone named Father Malloy because he can tell her more about her powers than she can. That's the second time the game has sent you on a quest to find someone that will finally reveal everything, only to reveal nothing. But don't worry, Father Malloy finally tells Angie
Aunt Julie.
to read her own thoughts so she can figure out what's going on. If you're sick of being exposition blueballed, the next mission is to go find Governor Stone, whose telephone number was found inside the Pussy Bar. He seems to know Angie when they meet, calling her Angela 1, but it's clear he has gone crazy, and Angie enters his dream where there's a cartoon rabbit you need to fight and beat. When you talk to Stone, he calls Angie Angel 1 and says that it's not Crowley we need to worry about, but something called the Horseman. Then he dies. It turns out that Stone worked on the same project as Saunders and Lindstrom did, and Max finds another name related to the project, which takes us inside a bank where we have to find the journal of another scientist. The author of the journal says that she was working on the Angel 1 project and that they discovered an ancient machine called the Fourth Horseman along with a chest. Inside the chest was an uncut diamond and an ancient Sumerian text on how to extract DNA from the center of it. The journal also makes mention of a secret lab where all of this research was conducted, and off go Angie and Max to find it.
2006.
When they do, just watch.
Then let's see where this takes us.
You'll need this to get in. Unfortunately, we were interrupted 2 days ago, so I couldn't give you the key, Angela.
You? But you're dead!
I nearly was. But a medical team from the National Guard found me and patched me up again.
Please help me fit the pieces of the puzzle together. What is Project Angel 1?
You are Angel 1.
I thought so. Who or what am I?
Well, we created you from the DNA that we found at the Fourth Horseman. We raised you until you were 5 in this laboratory. You developed unusually quickly. After 6 weeks, you could converse with us fluently.
I never have been at a loss for words.
When you were 6 months old, we realized that you had these special powers. We constantly asked ourselves how you always got what meals you wanted, and not what the doctors actually prescribed for you.
I like to get my own way.
As you got older, many of our colleagues had very vivid dreams about you. Thus, we found out about your second power. Sadly, there was an awful accident in the lab. You received a very powerful electric shock from our measuring instruments. Your your memory vanished along with your powers. As a result, the military rapidly lost interest in you because you no longer seemed useful to them. So the project was dropped.
Saunders also explains what the Fourth Horseman does and why everyone is losing their minds and attacking you.
As far as we know, the Horseman is a machine that provides permanent nanomachines, no larger than a virus. The nanobots are flying through the air and are spreading worldwide. As soon as you breathe them in, they course to your brain and specifically target the medial hypothalamus and the amygdala. This causes many people to become more aggressive, have violent tendencies. The effects are different in each case, but are all eventually fatal.
Long story short, you destroy the Fourth Horseman by fighting a toy. Allow me to say that this boss battle is atrocious. It's filled with spam, it's bugged to the point where you can't pick things up sometimes, there are multiple enemies, you move slowly so you have to strafe hop, and the toy fires Ubisoft logos at you. Awful. After you destroy the Horseman, Crowley captures Max, and Angie confronts him.
Are you looking for Max, Miss Prophet?
Shoot, Angie!
Ah! We'll meet again.
I thought you would be bigger.
Size doesn't matter. It's all about the technique, baby.
And that's the end of the game. Overall, I find the concept and story of Psychotoxic to be pretty interesting. For all of the shooters that came out in the mid-90s through to the mid-2000s, Psychotoxic's premise fits right in. The problem is that Psychotoxic presents its story terribly. You do nothing in the game but shoot people. There's no gathering of intel, no exploration of the levels required, because all of the information is dumped on you in these wooden cutscenes, leaving the player no sense of interactivity with the narrative or bonding with the world. What worked with many corridor shooters of old was that, in addition to being better games, right, was the fact that you could go out of your way in a level and exploration was usually rewarded with information or weapons. They were still linear by nature, but they made you an inhabitant of the world as opposed to a nomad drifting through the levels with no sense of purpose. It doesn't help that the pacing is also appalling. The following claim is total bullshit, and we'll talk about it more soon, but for the purposes of gauging the pacing, let's just go with it. Psychotoxic says it has 20 to 25 hours of gameplay. Assuming this is true, you accomplish nothing in the first 4 or 5 missions because no one has any answers for you, and there's no hints with information scattered in the levels. The incentive to keep playing at that point is the game, which in most other cases would be more than enough, but Psychotoxic is bad. And what's more, it gives you 80% of its arsenal and 100% of its powers by then, so you've already experienced a great chunk of the game, and the story hasn't progressed at all beyond physically moving to locations with no clue as to what's going on. Finally, let's just say it. The cutscenes are fucking awful. When you can actually hear what's being said and a cutscene hasn't been mixed in a toilet, you're treated to genuinely terrible delivery and voices that don't even really match the characters. The animation is almost non-existent, the framing is shit, and they just look so cheap. Now, Psychotoxic said it had 20 to 25 hours of gameplay. That is 100% bullshit. I finished the game in about 8 hours, and all of that is taking into consideration every death I had, and of course every bug I ran into. So, with the story out of the way, I'd really like to run down my laundry list of technical issues I encountered while playing Psychotoxic, and then we can talk about why this game is really as bad as it is. My knowledge of Psychotoxic's existence has spanned 3 Windows operating systems. The reason it has taken me 5 years to make a follow-up to when I originally played the demo of it on Vista is because this game is totally broken on Windows 7 and onward. I thought for a few years that it was simply impossible to get this game to run on 7. Whenever you would boot the game, it would just show a black screen. Sometimes you would hear audio, but most of the time you wouldn't. Then the game would crash. It wasn't until mid-2017, after messing around with it and being determined to get it running, that I figured out that you could, in fact, get the game to the main menu by repeatedly alt-tabbing and then waiting for what seemed like an eternity. But as soon as you tried to start a new game, you'd be met with the same black screen and long wait time. You could spam Alt-Tab again and get into the game, but then another black screen. I came to the conclusion that the problem had to be the cutscenes. The game's black screens corresponded with videos that should have been playing, such as publisher credits or opening cutscenes, and the audio you would sometimes hear during the black screens matched as well. After going into Psychotoxic's files and some digging, I figured out that the cutscenes were encoded using a codec named VP3. It seems relatively obscure for games, although I did also find it being used in the unofficial Thief 2 expansion, Thief 2X: Shadows of the Metal Age. You get the same problems there. Sometimes you hear audio, black screen, and then crash to desktop. I was about ready to give up on Psychotoxic, as even if you did the Alt-Tab maneuver, the wait time to actually see anything was upwards of 2 minutes. I, in my frustration, came up with a very simple solution. I went into the cutscenes folder, selected all the cutscenes, and then moved them to another folder. The game can't attempt to load the cutscenes if there are none to begin with. This method got me an in. I was finally playing the game even if there were no cutscenes. Unfortunately, the game is still very broken in other ways, either due to the operating system or leftover bugs from the release back in 2004. For example, Psychotoxic has a quick save and load system, and about 50% of the time, the quick load will crash the game unexpectedly. Sometimes the game would even crash if you died and made it to the menu to manually load a save. There's supposed to be a cutscene that loads here, which is probably what's causing these problems. Something that I was able to replicate with consistency was crashing the game after being killed while using slow motion. If you die with that power enabled, the game will instantly crash. I believe this is because the game has no clue what to do here. As previously mentioned, dying freezes everything happening in the game, but the way the slow motion works is by literally lowering the speed of everything happening by a specific interval of time. So when you die while using slow motion, the slow motion seems to override the freeze that is supposed to happen and desyncs the events of the game. In this example, I think I was dead long before I actually died, and you can even hear the regular death music and audio being slowed instead of playing normally. Besides all the crashes, there's also camera clipping, weapon sight misalignment, and the FOV is beyond busted. I tried fixing this in the console, but I ended up breaking the VFX placement for one of the weapons. I'm not really sure how the FOV works in this game, to be honest. While Psychotoxic was probably never meant to run in 1920 by 1080, a resolution achieved by hex editing, I don't see many differences between this and the 4x3 screenshots and gameplay I've researched. It's entirely possible that this weird claustrophobic effect extends to any resolution or aspect ratio. Finally, Psychotoxic is impossible to beat. Well, for some people. I found this totally game-breaking bug after researching another game-breaking bug. The first bug is that when you load into the penultimate level, you die. I have, to this day, no clue what causes this bug, or if it even relates to the other I'll mention after this. In the level, you're supposed to escape the fourth horseman and have to avoid the liquid beneath you. But when you spawn, the liquid is already there, and you die. I tried to bypass this using various methods. First, I used the console to skip through every single level until I got to the level again. It should be noted that the game crashed multiple times even as I tried doing this. This, unfortunately, did not work as I got to the level and the same bullshit. Then, out of desperation, I downloaded game saves of every level. I then tried to load the cursed level, and I got in. Do you want to guess what happens next? Welcome to OpenGL error number 436. The end. There is no fix to this bug, plain and simple. I've never finished Psychotoxic because my copy of the game will not allow it. Any attempts to override this bug will see the exact same results. Failure. This bug is ultimately the fault of no one. Its existence a perfect conclusion to this story. The story of Psychotoxic, and why it took 6 years to make one of the worst games ever. This is a photo of one Frank Fitzner. More specifically, this is a photo of Frank Fitzner at the Leipzig Game Convention in 2003, about to present his studio's game to the attending audience. In 1998, after having shipped a few successful educational games, and after the birth of his daughter, Fitzner began working on a game entitled, at the time, Psychotoxic: The Fourth Horseman. In the same year, Fitzner assembled a team of developers recruited mostly from the Half-Life modding community, and thus, Nuclear Vision Entertainment was born. Having scouted out various engines for Psychotoxic, Fitzner received a call in late 1999 from Vulpine, a company looking for developers to create demos for its engine, at the time called the Vision engine. Fitzner initially disregarded Vision earlier in the year due to a lack of proper visualization tools, but after they redesigned their SDK and integrated a level editor, Fitzner was interested. He began creating demo levels for Vulpine with special attention to presentation, as he wanted to try and use these levels later in hopes to entice publishers. And his meticulous planning worked. The levels, along with a detailed design document, caught the interest of CDV Software, a company that Vulpine had already licensed its engine to for one game. CDV was no small fish. At the time, they were the largest publisher in the German market, with their success largely attributed to the sale of World War II strategy games and their porn games. CDV created the now somewhat infamous Lula franchise, a series of economic simulator games featuring pornographic actress Lula. None of this, however, seemed to deter Fitzner. After seeing his demo levels in early 2000, CDV showed great interest in Psychotoxic, and it was agreed upon behind closed doors that Psychotoxic would be built on the Vision engine, should Fitzner decide to work with CDV. The only issue was money. Fitzner had calculated that they would need a budget of 2.6 million marks and a team of 11 men to realize Psychotoxic, but CDV was only willing to invest 1.5 million marks. Fitzner described the situation with CDV as a unique opportunity and refused to pass it up. 11 men became 6 and a part-time freelancer. This move did irreversible damage to Psychotoxic. As team member Song Seidel admitted many years later, this shoestring budget forced them to cut everything interesting in Fitzner's original design document for the game. These features included, but are likely not limited to, multiplayer, many of the angelic powers, and various other undetailed mechanics. Once the monolithic 26-page contract with CDV was signed and the first check cleared, Nuclear Vision Entertainment made their home in an old office building that was outfitted with IKEA furniture and new computers. Psychotoxic was to be built on the Vision engine, but Vulpine had promised an extensive overhaul of the old engine featuring many new improvements. These improvements were delayed time and time again, which staggered the development of Psychotoxic to the point where CDV told Nuclear Vision to inquire about the licensing fees of the Unreal Engine. It took CDV 5 months to decide to continue using the Vision engine, and development of Psychotoxic seems to have officially kicked off in late 2001. It should be noted that while Psychotoxic was being developed by Nuclear Vision, an internal CDV team was also working on a new installment in the Lula franchise called Lula 3D. This was the first game that Vulpine had partnered with CDV on for use of the Vision engine. I bring this up because it seems that at one point, Nuclear Vision may have done modeling work for the game. There is a Lula category on the old Nuclear Vision website talking about how they rebuilt the model in 2 weeks. After examining both Angela and Lula, I wouldn't be surprised if they were modeled by the same person, especially considering that the quality of the Lula model is far higher than any of the others in her own game. Anyways, 2002 was a good year for Psychotoxic. It saw the most consistent stretch of work on the game, and the team at their most harmonious. The early months of 2003 were described by Fitzner as labor-intensive, but again, harmonious, as the team had come a long way since the situation with Vulpine and was working on the game full force. It was in mid-2003, August to be exact, that Nuclear Vision was confronted with the realization that the rumors they kept hearing about CDV were true. Perhaps a consequence of Germany's failing economy at the time, CDV had gotten too big too soon. They also spent money on projects that were either lazily managed or not managed at all, resulting in the hemorrhaging of funds. Both of these situations landed CDV in serious financial trouble, which they refused to admit until they started canceling projects left and right. With each passing day, the Nuclear Vision team would read about CDV titles that were either greenlit for continued production or canceled, but no one would tell them what was going on with Psychotoxic. There was no honor among thieves, and CDV fired its own personnel various times over in an attempt to show shareholders that things were fine. Psychotoxic had a total of 7 producers in its development cycle, and the last one was randomly fired by CDV with no reason given. This producer cared so much about Psychotoxic that he didn't even email the team to tell them what had happened. Of course, another way to save money is to cancel more projects, and CDV tried their damnedest to cancel Psychotoxic, but they had no legal grounds to do so, as Nuclear Vision had met all of their milestones. Eventually, CDV just stopped sending money, which meant that on top of already having a low budget, Psychotoxic would not even receive the amount anticipated to complete a fraction of its original scope. Production couldn't just stop, however, and after showing off the game at the Leipzig Game Convention in 2003, the team went to work on finishing what they could. It was at this time that they restructured the physics and ragdoll systems. They were aware that they could not, at that point, engage in a visual competition with any game, so they reworked almost all existing 3D models to behave as physics objects. A tedious process, but one Fitzner determined was worth the trouble, as it would create great situations in the slow motion sequences. This is why Psychotoxic has the insane amount of physics objects just littering the world. The levels were also built on the idea that they would get filled with content later, but since the money never came, they stayed oversized and underpopulated. Fitzner described them appearing flat out unfinished. Keep in mind that all of this work was done by 2 or 3 people, and that at some point, the only animator on the project quit, meaning that their duties were taken over by Sonk Seidel, who was already presiding over texture work, levels, modeling of all weapons, and all particle effects. In September of 2003, after not receiving any installments from CDV, Fitzner knew that they had to be on the search for a new publisher. Fitzner spoke with many, but it was Ubisoft who agreed to publish the game in German-speaking countries after a fruitful presentation and discussion of milestone goals. After a call to Paris, Fitzner was given the green light. Sadly, this was never meant to be. CDV had invested 850,000 marks into Psychotoxic and wasn't going to let it go easily. If they couldn't cancel it, they would at least try to recoup their investment. This led to a very long and drawn-out lawsuit where it was agreed that Nuclear Vision would pay a 30,000 mark transfer fee to CDV, presumably to get out of the contract. This dried up Nuclear Vision's financial reserves, although Fitzner made sure to keep the employees' salaries tolerable, as he and others in leadership positions on the project went unpaid for the next 3 months, while they paid the monthly installments to CDV. This lawsuit cost them the deal with Ubisoft, as they lost interest due to how long it went on for. Without a publisher, without a complete game, and with no money, being forced to borrow from family and friends to pay the rest of the settlement with CDV, Frank Fitzner, Nuclear Vision, and Psychotoxic were nearly dust. That is, until an old friend and consultant to Fitzner called him out of the blue and said he found someone with great interest in publishing Psychotoxic, Vitis, a gaming accessories company who had already brought smaller titles to market. After positive negotiations, Fitzner signed a contract with Vitis to publish the game in Germany, and Vitis also found them a localization deal in Russia. In the span of 4 months, what remained of Nuclear Vision worked on polishing and debugging what they could of Psychotoxic. They also integrated Starforce copy protection into the game, something that would break it entirely, unbeknownst to the team at the time. Finally, after 6 years of work, Nuclear Vision handed over the Gold Master of Psychotoxic on August 2nd, 2004. The game was meant to be published overseas by GMX Media, but GMX Media refused to pay them any money, resulting in another lawsuit and a search for a new overseas publisher. Nuclear Vision had bigger problems anyways, as a monster was about to rear its ugly head. This monster's name was Doom 3. Vitis had the money to put Psychotoxic on store shelves, but none to market it in any capacity, so when Psychotoxic hit stores in Germany on September 3rd, 2004, it was often found next to overwhelming copies of Doom 3. And as Nuclear Vision was about to find out, no amount of flashlights could illuminate this path. Soon after the game saw its release, Nuclear Vision started getting complaints from people who bought the game. ATI X800 and 9700 Pro cards ran into massive shader issues with their latest drivers, making the game unplayable. Now, those that could get into the game because they had different cards couldn't play it for more than an hour without getting a very specific prompt. OpenGL error number 436. This message was completely arbitrary and only meant to appear on pirated copies of the game, yet it was popping up everywhere regardless of if you purchased your copy legitimately. When Nuclear Vision received the first batch of Psychotoxic DVDs, all of their test computers ran the game fine, so Vidis okayed the production of another batch. This batch, however, was compromised and used differing material thicknesses, which broke the control track and a drive's ability to read said control track. When installing the Starforce protection, the DRM needed to be able to read this information, and when it couldn't, it determined that the copy of the game was illegitimate. OpenGL error number 436 is something that persists in Psychotoxic 14 years after its release, even with the copy I bought of it, because the second batch of DVDs were faulty and the only way to fix it was to terminate the DRM completely, a choice Fitzner was prepared to make, but Vidis was not. Speaking of Vidis, they lost their asses on Psychotoxic, as sales were far below expectation and they did not even break even on the game. They ended up lowering the price to €30, something Fitzner wanted before its release. 1 week before Christmas of 2004, Vidis sent Nuclear Vision a letter basically stating that because they agreed to the price change, that they would no longer receive the rest of the money from them promised in the contract. This resulted in Nuclear Vision reaching another legal settlement and paying another lawyer. Psychotoxic did eventually make its way overseas on March 8, 2005, published by Whiptail Interactive, a company with a decent reputation, or so Nuclear Vision thought. A contract was signed for $140,000 between the two parties, and Whiptail paid the first two installments, but only part of the third, sending a lawyer's letter along with it, the contents of which Fitzner never divulged because it pertained to ongoing litigation. Whiptail hoped to make more money off of Psychotoxic and use the profits to pay Nuclear Vision, but they had no money to market the game in the first place, so in June of the same year, Whiptail went insolvent and later bankrupt. Psychotoxic's final victim was Nuclear Vision itself. With no plans for future games and no money whatsoever, it was mutually agreed upon in September by the remaining members of the studio to disband. Pictured here is Fitzner's last day at the studio on October 31st. Nuclear Vision was officially dissolved on December 31st, 2009. And we've reached the end of this story. It's not exactly hard to see why Psychotoxic turned out the way it did. It had the most turbulent development cycle I'm aware of. Everything that could have gone wrong did. But despite all of this, it happened. And that's my biggest takeaway. Psychotoxic, a game that was built on an unfinished porn engine and with a little over half of its already shoestring budget, made it onto market through the hard work and determination of a team that had many chances to quit and didn't. To quote Fitzner, Psychotoxic's 7-year journey was extraordinary. There was, of course, life after Nuclear Vision. Seidel and the other members of the team still work in the games industry to this day. Seidel himself went on to work on both Kane and Lynch games for IO Interactive, and is now working on an unannounced indie game. Fitzner became a graphic designer, working for a few different companies, until he went solo in 2010. This photo was taken almost 10 years after his last day in the Nuclear Vision office, and about a year before he died. We are all at one point in our lives told to go out and follow our dreams. Lucky for us today, Frank Fitzner did. Thank you for watching, and rest in peace,